is E&P Reports, a vodcast from editor and publisher. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing. And this episode sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide understand the need to accelerate its growth now. Plus, traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way. IQ Audience Plus is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers media companies to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income now with IQ Audience Plus. Visit townnews.com EP today to learn more. And warm holiday greetings. I'm Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P. If you are listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, please follow us. Watching us on our YouTube channel, subscribe button just below the screen, bell to the right. If you hit that, you'll get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. Recently, I was skimming the New York Times online. A good friend of mine, Alan Leveritt, I've known for years, is the owner and publisher of the Arkansas Times, the alternative news weekly statewide in Arkansas. He penned an op-ed for the New York Times, and they published it. And it was about how he was fighting for a couple of years now. He was fighting his state, who had implemented, like 32 other states, a BDS. That stands for a boycott, divest, and sanction bill. Basically saying, and I'm paraphrasing this now, if you want to do business with the state in any way, shape, form, or size, in other words, receive money from the state of Arkansas, which could be advertising, and that's a good deal of his top line revenue from the university. They advertise with him, events and other things. That if you want that money, you have to sign a pledge that you will not boycott Israel. Now, whether you lean one way or other politically towards the issue, you got to put this in perspective. The state is now mandating that Allen sign a pledge on how he will present an issue politically to his readers. And if you think about the idea of a free and unfettered press, this is in some ways an oxymoron. You can't do this, at least to some, including the ACLU. That's who Alan first sought out for help. So we're going to now explore this because recently, believe it or not, Alan and the Arkansas Times was featured in a Just Vision documentary. Now, that's an organization that supports awareness and supports Palestinians and Israelis who pursue freedom. So in other words, there's a documentary about this that brought in the Arkansas Times. And we also have the lead attorney on this for the ACLU. So let me bring in Julia Bacha, the filmmaker and creator and director of the recent documentary. It's simply called Boycott for Just Vision. Let's bring in Brian Hauss. He is the senior staff attorney at the ACLU. And of course, helping me manage this dialogue will be our own Gretchen Peck. She is a contributing editor here at E&P as we chat with Alan Leveritt and our entire panel on what the heck this BDS is all about. This is a really interesting story. This first of all, full disclosure, Alan, you and I go way back. The Arkansas Times was a client of my company, the Blinder Group. I've been to your operation a few times over the years, but when I got tipped off that you had penned an op-ed for the New York Times and read it, I got to tell you, Alan, I flipped. I had no idea that this was going on. So I'm honored that all of you can join us today. Gretchen, why don't you kick it off? Why don't you see if we can get some background on this? Maybe Brian could give us a little background on what the heck's going on here.
Sure. Actually, I'd love to start with Julia, if I may. Julia, you've been in documentary filmmaking for a number of years now. I'm curious how you sort of started down the path of the documentary Boycott.
Thank you, Gretchen, and thanks, Mike, for having us on the show. It's a pleasure to be here with Brian and Alan. I am a documentary filmmaker who has been working on the issue of Israel and Palestine for 17 years now with the team at Just Vision. And all of our films up until Boycott have focused on the stories of Palestinians and Israelis who are working to build a future of equality and justice in the region. And when we learned that there were laws being passed across America, which are now already laws in 33 states, that were saying that Americans would no longer be allowed to have public contracts unless they signed a pledge promising not to engage in boycotts of Israel, meaning that they no longer can advocate for Palestinian human rights and express that political opinion, we knew as a team that it was a really important story to tell. We were surprised by how little public coverage and public scrutiny was happening on these laws based on how severe the consequences were for the first constitutional rights of individuals. And when several Americans from different political backgrounds, like Alan, who's here with us, as well as Bahia Maui from Texas, Mick Jordal in Arizona, and Esther Kuntz in Kansas, among a couple of others, decided to sue in order to preserve their First Amendment rights, we knew we had the through line to make a film about these laws.
I want to jump in and ask Brian a question before we get into the deep dive of how this affects the free press. Brian, what does the word boycott mean to the ACLU? What he just said was, if I am a guy that paves roads in a town and I have a state contract and I speak out against Israeli policy against the Palestinian population, is that boycotting? Could that affect my contract?
It could potentially be prohibited under these laws. And so I think, what the core of a boycott campaign is the collective withholding of patronage. It's when a group of people, individuals or businesses, get together and say, we're not going to buy these consumer products because we want to express a political belief, some political opposition to the sellers of those products or to the organizations that they're in collaboration with. And so, for example, what you see with many of these boycotts of Israel or Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories is people saying, for example, like Mick Jordal said in Arizona, I don't want to buy Hewlett-Packard printers because Hewlett-Packard provides information technology services to the Israeli Defense Forces. And I don't want to be part of that. I want to be complicit in that. I want Hewlett-Packard to change its policies. And so I'm not going to support Hewlett-Packard to express my political beliefs. And this is a form of political protest that goes all the way back to the Boston Tea Party. It's as old as the country itself. And it's been a significant part of American protest movements all throughout American history, whether it's the abolitionist movement, the Montgomery bus boycott and the civil rights movement, the boycott of apartheid South Africa. Boycotts are something that happens every day in American politics. Now, your question was also whether these laws could affect speech, and I believe that they can, because what the laws say is that any action designed to limit commercial relations with a business operating in Israel or in territories controlled by Israel can be prohibited as part of the law. And so, for example, if you're picketing outside of Best Buy saying, don't buy Hewlett-Packard printers, Hewlett-Packard supports the Israeli Defense Forces, that could be part of the law. And that's actually what one of the appellate courts that has considered this has already found, that is the kind of speech that could be chilled as a result of the law. And so editorial policies basically saying, we think that Ben & Jerry's should pull out of the West Bank, those can conceivably be prohibited by these statutes. So it doesn't just affect consumer choices, it affects speech and associations supporting those consumer choices.
All right, so let's circle into Alan now. Alan, you run an alternative statewide weekly for Arkansas. Now, first of all, let me paint a picture. You've had a wonderful year and a half doing business, right? Because COVID does, I'm kidding. You've had to struggle for every dollar you've had because you can't rely on subscription revenue, right? You've always been a wide open paper. You're in a state that leans far right, and you may lean a bit to the left. I don't want to get into the politics of it. And you must do at least 15 stories a day that are anti-Israel. I'm kidding. This is not your bailiwick. There's not this huge Palestinian population in Arkansas. Suddenly, a document is put in front of you that says, and this was a couple of years ago, okay, Alan, you got to sign this if you want to keep some of this really coveted state business, right? Because we're advertising with you. And why not just sign it, Alan? I mean, come on. You take the bucks. Who cares? Why put up a stink, Alan? What was your motivation?
It's just, this is a violation of our First Amendment rights. And we don't take, what it boils down to, we don't take political positions in return for advertising. That's as simple as I can, can say it. We don't take.
But that's state advertising.
Even worse, worse. it's even worse that the state does not dictate our political positions, period. And we don't do that. And I didn't get into this business to do that. I've been at it for 47 years and I ain't going to do it now. So
you're willing to risk that coveted income just because it pissed you off. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, no, because listen, I got 26 families down here that depend on this. But so, this wasn't just knee jerk, but we have completely reinvented our business model here. And so we now have almost 3,000 paid subscribers for full access to our website at $100 a year, $110 a year. So we've done some things that have insulated us so that we can hopefully, deal with this. So we're not just looking to be martyrs.
All right, Gretchen, why don't you take it from here?
Well, I was curious if you could sort of quantify what's happened with this legislation since 2017, Alan. What was your relationship with the University of Arkansas prior to that, and how was it imperiled?
We have a very warm relationship with the people that are there. The chancellor, the marketing director, we go back many, many years, and they've been a long-time advertiser. I started getting, I guess in 2018, I started getting these notices coming across my desk saying that we needed to get an ad from the health department. Well, I need to sign this pledge. Well, we would just, think about the thousands and thousands of transactions that the state of Arkansas does every day or every week. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking there's no way in heck they can enforce this. And they didn't, because we just throw it away. And the Department of Finance and Administration is just pulling their hair out. They don't have the staff to ride herd on this. But there was one purchasing agent at the university that just wasn't going to let this go. And he didn't too much talk to me, but he went to the marketing director and says, you've got to get them to sign. And finally, when I just said, Tim, we're not going to sign this, then the purchasing agent he wouldn't give us a purchase order and basically canceled the contract. And that's when we sued.
And then, is that where the ACLU came in, Alan?
Yeah. I mean, we know the people with the ACLU here. We've known them for many years, and they're, personal friends in some instances. And so I was just visiting. In fact, I didn't know what I was going to do. And I was visiting with them one day, and they said, well, this is something that sounds like we'd be very interested in. So we went to federal district court. The state's basic argument was that a boycott is an economic action and therefore subject to state regulation. We maintain that boycott is essentially is political speech. I mean, it's you're using your dollars to make a political point and therefore protected. Mm-hmm. We thought, this was going to be over pretty quick, and we lost. And the judge agreed with the state, and so then we took it to the 8th Circuit. We went before a 3-judge panel, and we won. But the state appealed that, and they wanted the case heard en banc in front of the whole 8th Circuit. And that argument's been made. We're a little concerned about, based on some of the questioning, this may not go our way. So that's what we're dealing with.
Julia, I saw some snips, some segments from this amazing Just Vision. Can I just put a little, Just Vision is not a Palestinian organization, right? It's Just Vision is looking for, how would you describe it? Just some dignity and conversation between the Palestinian and Israelis, right? So, I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, but that is and you did this amazing documentary called Boycott. One of the things I did was interview some of the state senators in Arkansas who passed this bill. One basically said it was God's right. Do I have this right? Can you just give us a little paraphrase? He actually said the people of Israel were chosen by God, so we signed this to support God's children. Am I paraphrasing that right?
Thank you, Mike. So Just Vision is a nonprofit media organization. So we're very focused on bringing the stories that are not being told on the mainstream media. We are a team of filmmakers, journalists, and human rights advocates. There are Israelis, Palestinians, there are Americans. I'm Brazilian. We are a very international group of people. It's a women-led team. And we're extremely concerned around where the conversation is going around the right of Americans to be able to express their political opinions regarding what's happening in the Middle East. We think it's critical that Americans do not feel that they're going to lose their jobs or that their companies and newspapers are going to be put in jeopardy if they want to express their political dissatisfaction with Israeli policies in regards to Palestinians. And so one of the things that we very much wanted to do in our film was investigate how these bills were able to get to 33 states with the vast majority of Americans, even journalists, not knowing about it. And one of the things that we learned through our interview with Senator Bart Hester, who is the Republican majority leader in the Senate in Arkansas, who was a co-sponsor of the bill, is that there was a lot of engagement of right-wing conservative evangelical lobby groups in passing this legislation around the country. And Hester talks very openly to us in the film about the religiously motivated reasons that he did that. He speaks not only about how religion motivated his decision to sponsor these bills, but how religion motivates every aspect of what he does as a policymaker, and that he believes that the church is protected from the state, not that the state is protected from the church. And he's not a unique person.
There's some logic.
Very widespread.
All right, but then you had another state legislature person, I don't know his name, basically say, well, we vote on thousands of things a year. This just kind of goes, they said do it, so I voted it. Again, I'm paraphrasing. Mm-hmm. So let me switch that over to Brian now. Brian, this happens every day, doesn't it? I mean, stuff like this just slips through and becomes law.
Unfortunately, that's the case. And as I think we saw in the film, one of the state legislators basically said, we get thousands of these bills across our desks. And, we just kind of, we're told how to vote on it, and that's what we do. And so the individual state legislators are not often making the decisions here. Instead, you have advocacy groups like ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, drafts these model bills, pushes them out to the state legislatures, and the party whips basically just decide what they're going to prioritize, and then the members vote how they're told to vote. It's not a process where there's a lot of independent review going on, and there's certainly not a lot of review for consistency with the Constitution or the First Amendment.
Gretchen, you were about to jump in there.
Yeah, I was curious. One of the things that I haven't discovered yet is the language across the 33 states that have imposed this legislation. Is it identical? Are there nuances?
There are some variations between states, but by and large, in many of the states, it's almost verbatim identical. They're all working off the same model bill. And so sometimes, in the legislative process, one member will come in and say, I want to change this or I want to change that. So they might tinker at the margins in certain places. Mm-hmm. But by and large, you'll see not even just the same language in the operative parts of the statute, but in the preamble and the legislative findings, it'll be the exact same declarations. And so they're all working from a common text.
Alan, you brought up something very interesting in the documentary. And I urge, before we're done, Julia, let people know how they can have access to this. I know it's being released over time. Alan, you didn't take a political stance here. You said you're concerned about this, not because it's just from the right side. This could happen on the left side, right? I mean, you gave a scenario. I love what you said about Massachusetts. Would you repeat that, please?
Yeah, so what happens? People on the right need to understand that, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And so what happens when the state of Massachusetts says, in order to do business with the state of Massachusetts, you can't boycott Planned Parenthood or gun control groups or whatever progressive flavor of the day that they're dealing with. So what this is and a good example of this is what's already happened in Texas. Beginning September 1, 2 laws went into effect in Texas. One says that you cannot get a state contract if you boycott fossil fuels, the oil business. Another says that you cannot get a state contract if you boycott firearms manufacturers or their trade associations. And editorial writers, listen up here. A trade association is another word for the NRA. So let's say you're a member of Mothers Demand Action, a gun control group. And Obviously, Mothers Demand Action are definitely boycotting the NRA. You won't find any of them joining the NRA, and neither will that organization support the NRA. They are boycotting it. So does that mean that if you were a member of Mothers Demand Action, that you can't be a school teacher in the state of Texas?
Okay, so
Where does it stop? Where does it
Brian, if one of Alan's editorial people, okay, let's move Alan quickly to Texas, okay? So he's now down there, and he writes an editorial, an op-ed that supports Planned Parenthood or let's say supports gun control. Is that a boycott? Can someone stop the money from just a legal transaction that he was going to take from a university or the state?
It's at least arguable that it could be. And what somebody might argue in those circumstances is say, look, if he's writing an editorial piece calling on people not to support Walmart because it sells ammunition and firearms, or not to support or to remove their memberships from the NRA, they would say, in effect, he's calling for a boycott. So that itself is a boycott action that could be regulated by these types of statutes.
But the state would argue that we may be reaching too far here. And I want to make the Times position clear. We're saying that you cannot require us to take a position. You cannot require us to sign a pledge that we're not going to boycott Israel. At least in the Arkansas case, no one has said that you can't write an editorial supporting boycotts, for example. But you must sign this pledge, say that you're going to take the political position that you will not take part in a boycott. And that is forcing us to take a political position, in our opinion, in return for advertising, return for money, which we learned in Journalism 101 back in college that you don't do. And
because we're supposed to be, correct me if I'm wrong, Gretchen, back me up on this. We're supposed to be a free and unfettered press. I keep saying this, a bunch of imperfect.
Every time you hear the word sign, the phrase "sign this pledge,"
you can't tell the press to sign a pledge on behalf. If you're a government agency, Alan, Brian, am I being stupid, or is that constitutional 101? It's
constitutional law 101, and it doesn't just apply to the press. This goes all the way back to the McCarthy era, when the government and the state, the federal government and the states were requiring their employees to say, I hereby, pledge that I'm not going to support the Communist Party. I'm not going to take place in subversive activities, all those kinds of things. And the Supreme Court said, no, the government can't use its economic leverage to dictate citizens' private political beliefs. And that's fundamentally what's going on here when the state is asking contractors to sign this form, taking, as Alan said, what is essentially a political position on boycotts of Israel.
So, Julia, basically what you're doing here, you found Alan on this issue. Everybody on this meeting has their own goals. Julia, your goal is to help the Palestinian/Israeli population to have a better dialogue, right? Just stop the rhetoric and let's communicate and see if we can find a way for this country to survive together. But by bringing Alan into it, you are now shining a light on a constitutional issue. Remember, our audience is news publishers. Am I right, Gretchen? We cannot have a government agency dictate to us what we write. Julia, do you understand how you really brought light to this? This is an amazing story.
Thanks, Mike. And just to clarify, we are a media organization ourselves. We are publishers too.
Okay, so of course, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so Just Vision publishes a Hebrew language site called Sicha Mekomit, which in Hebrew means local call. It's run by our Israeli team on the ground. So we're very much focused on storytelling. We're not activists in terms of bringing Palestinians and Israelis together. That's not at all what we are involved in. We're involved in really bringing out the stories that are critical for Americans, for Israelis, for Palestinians, for the international community to know, that are not generally being told on the regular mainstream media that people are consuming day to day. And so those are the stories that we really focus on. And I think just to the point of the journalism, that I really think it's critical, and I'm so glad that you're bringing us here to your podcast, is that there's another case that Brian can also speak to a lot, of George Hale, who was an NPR journalist in Texas, working for the local affiliate, who was told that he needed to sign the pledge that he was not going to participate in a boycott of Israel if he wanted to continue working for NPR.
What?
And so NPR people who work for NPR on a contract basis are all, in many of these states, having to sign this anti-boycott pledge. Now, George actually lived in the West Bank for many years. He was a journalist at a local Palestinian publication called Ma'an, and he actually didn't want to buy products from international companies that were participating and benefiting and profiting from the occupation of the Palestinians. But he was put on an impossible position, because if he refused to sign, his contract would be immediately terminated. And the investigation, really important investigation that he was involved with in Texas, which was a murder investigation, would have been immediately finished, because he was the only person involved in it. He had already promised to the family members of this missing woman that he was going to get to the bottom of what happened to her. And now the state was telling him, either you promise not to boycott Israel, or you cannot find out what happened to this woman who was murdered and nobody knows about.
Alan, is the leverage here that NPR or the local public broadcasting station is taking state money? I thought it was federal money.
This is new to me. Yeah, I thought that was. I don't think our local. Yeah, well, here's the deal. The local NPR affiliate is sponsored by and partially funded, I'm sure, by the University of Arkansas. And so there's your
hook. I keep forgetting about the state colleges. They are all over NPR. They're all over they're big advertisers, Alan.
These are the advertisers we're losing is the colleges. See, and so that's very interesting. And I was not aware.
Gretchen, what else do you have on your
Well, I'm curious about, I'll play devil's advocate here and talk about the proponents of this anti-BDS.
Yeah, who's in favor, right?
They will say to you, well, we're in favor of this because, we want to, as a nation, basically create a culture whereby American businesses are not financially harming our allies. But of course, we do that all the time. We just saw that in the case of besting France in a submarine contract in Australia. So this is very specific to Israel. I'm curious about what you've all observed in terms of kind of a counter lobby here. Obviously, it's gotten traction in Congress. In the Senate, we see Rubio and others kind of advocating for this language and federal support or protection for the states. But is there anybody in Congress right now who's sort of pushing back on it?
Good question. But Brian, what do you got?
Sure thing. So I actually first came to this issue because there was a bill in Congress called the Israel Anti-Boycott Act that would have made it a crime to participate in UN-led boycotts of companies that are operating in Israeli settlements in the West Bank. And so there was an attempt in Congress to actually outlaw any participation in those UN-led boycotts, or even providing information to the UN Human Rights Council that would have helped it build a database of companies that should be subject to the UN boycott call. Mm-hmm. And that was a bill that had bipartisan support in Congress from both Democrats and Republicans. Now, fortunately, at the end of the day, a number of senators, actually from both parties, stood up and said that the bill violated First Amendment rights.
There you go.
And the bill was eventually defeated in Congress around 2018. I have every expectation that bill is likely to come back to Congress, particularly if the Republican Party regains control of either the House or the Senate.
Julia, how does the Chabad or the Lubavitch, how does the far right Israeli, I don't even want to say Israeli, I would say lobby, the Jewish far right lobby, are they pushing this through? Is there money behind this, to your knowledge, in Congress?
So the film Boycott actually went quite deep in terms of investigating the lobby groups that have been behind this law. There were participation from the traditional Israel lobby in America, so groups like AIPAC that do a lot of work at the federal level and at the state level participated in supporting it. There's very strong evidence, including coming from former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself, openly saying that the Israeli government has pushed for these bills. And we see actually when many governors are signing the bill, there's, they often will talk about how the consul general was the one who asked them to do it, or they will thank such and such, like thanking Israeli government officials. And we found out through a partnership with an Israeli investigative journalist called Itamar Ben-Zaken, who works on an organization in Israel, media organization called the Seventh Eyes, a media watchdog. They filed a Freedom of Information request with the Israeli government to try to understand where the funding from the Ministry of Strategic Affairs was going, because they had a hint that there was a lot of money being sent to American organizations in a way that wasn't publicly available to the Israeli public, because the Ministry of Strategic Affairs was created by the government to combat any form of delegitimization against the state of Israel. But they put themselves in complete secrecy, saying, we're not going to say anything about what we're doing, where any of the money is going. You can't have access to it. So it took 3 years for this investigative journalist to secure the documents. And he found out that the Ministry of Strategic Affairs actually created an organization called Concert in order to channel money from the Israeli government to American organizations without these American organizations having to register with FARA, which is the Foreign Agent Registrations Act, which requires American organizations that are involved in political lobbying that are receiving foreign money, in this case, Israeli government money, to register as foreign agents. And so that is another aspect that the film reveals.
Gretchen, I feel like we're missing another player in our dialogue. We should have a poli-sci professor, because the question I have to ask next, and maybe my mind's going in the wrong direction, is we are living in a very polarized culture right now where the news media, the far right, keeps talking about Muslim, not even understanding that Palestinians, a lot of them are Christian, right? I mean, but the Muslims against the Jews. So the Jew must be, if you're in favor of Israel, you're in favor of America. You see where I'm going with this? Is that feeding into this as well? The fact that we have a population that is becoming anti-Muslim, or am I taking this too far?
I would say Islamophobia plays a huge role in this as well. And there is, unfortunately, this country suffers a lot from Islamophobia.
If I may jump in, Mike, I'm curious too. Obviously, we're going to see more challenges to these laws. We've got 33 states now that are probably going to be tied up in court on this.
Brian's going to be working on that. But
yeah, Brian, you're going to be busy. But so as I was researching this, I was looking back to Citizens United and the Supreme Court decision on that, which in effect allows businesses to spend at will on politicians and PAC money and so forth. That seems kind of like an interesting precedent. Does that sort of embolden the cases against anti-BDS legislation?
I don't think it directly bears on those cases, because the core holding of Citizens United essentially was that when money is used to facilitate speech, sometimes the spending of that money is protected in order to allow the speech to be broadcast and promoted. And so when money supports speech, sometimes the First Amendment protects that.
Okay.
Here, by contrast, what we're really saying is that participation in these boycott activities is a kind of political protest that needs to be and has been recognized as protected by the First Amendment. But I do think there's a parallel here, because at the end of the day, what Citizens United really protects is the right of people with a lot of money to have their voices heard in the political process. Mm-hmm. Boycotts are the tools for the poorly financed causes of little people to make their voices heard in the political process. Mm-hmm. And so if on the one hand, the Supreme Court is saying, well, people with a lot of money, you can spend freely on PACs and influence legislation that way. But hey, people without any money, even if you want to just get together and say, we're not going to buy something, we, the state, are going to come in and regulate that and tell you what you can and can't do. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, just gets the equation completely backwards.
Brian, okay, go ahead, Gretchen.
There's another aspect that I think will be of interest to our readers also. And Julia, you touched on this. I had watched a post viewing roundtable that you had recently. And you had mentioned during that you were frustrated that more members of the press have not picked up on this story. I think you've maybe sort of sparked that now with your documentary. But what would your message be to newspapers around the country about why it's important that we start covering this?
Julia, you've got the platform, you've got the audience. What's your message?
I love it. This is the best audience. And I think, for our entire team, it's just been shocking how the invisibility that has been the reality of this issue, right? Like there's been so little coverage of these laws. And Mike, I completely get, and I know that it's a crisis in terms of local journalism. And I agree that it's tied to that. I also think that there is a reluctance on many journalists and editors to want to talk about this law for fear that they are getting into an explosive issue that might backfire for them. And part of what we wanted with the film and bringing the story out is saying there's nothing explosive about this, except that these laws are completely challenging the very basic First Amendment rights of the press.
Amen.
And of everyday Americans who want to be able to work for the government and have their own private political opinions. That's what's explosive about this. And if journalists who are here, who, Alan has said, went to school, learned all the principles of basic journalism, are unwilling to talk about this threat to their very industry, to the morals and principles that led them to journalism. Because I know many journalists. Nobody becomes a journalist to make a buck.
Tell me about it.
You become a journalist because you are here for a reason. You're here to find the truth. You're running to the fire. You want to inform your audiences about what's happening and make sure that they are equipped to live their lives with the proper information that they need. This is information that Americans need right now. And so I really hope that people will start covering it.
We're going to give Alan his final words.
The reason the press is not covering this story is because they've signed the pledge themselves and they're embarrassed. They don't want to be hypocrites.
Do you really feel that way, or did they just sign it not thinking about what the heck they were signing? When the Democrat Gazette did their one piece on this story, I said, you need to ask your own publisher if he signed it. And they did. And he said, well, it was a business decision. And man, I understand the business decision because our business sucks right now, okay, as an industry. And so you're doing Our Business Journal, which makes a lot of money. They've signed it. So what are they going to do? Are they going to start editorializing against this after they've signed it? Heck no. They zip they have to self-censor now, or else they're just embarrassed by this whole situation. That's why there's no Brian, that's what's pernicious about this in the press. Okay, so Brian, let's assume we've motivated a few other Alan Leveritts out there. All right, just a few others that said, did we sign that thing? Where's the business manager? What's going on around here? Am my state one of those 33? What resources does the ACLU have for news publishers now? Where do they go? And what could they do if they agree with Alan that this is not right? What can you tell them?
What I would tell them to do is to call their local ACLU affiliate, and then I'll probably get in touch with them myself shortly thereafter.
Because you are the spearhead on this thing for the ACLU, correct? This is yours.
I've been the lead litigator for the ACLU on this issue. Yes, that's right. All
right, cool. All right, let's bring this thing home. Alan, this is the beginning of us covering this story. Am I right, Gretchen? This is not this. They ain't going to. We're going to stay on top of this one, big time. Julia, what a wonderful documentary! Great work, and thank you for your insights. And Brian, you obviously, do you have a life? I mean, because you're going to be so busy. I mean, to tell your wife and kids, if you have them, that you're going to be at the office all the time, because this is going to blow up. This is huge, in my opinion. And we appreciate, not that we're taking sides on this, but we appreciate you fighting the fight with us for a free press. And in my opinion, that's the battle here right now. That's the primary battle. So with that being said, Alan, if someone wants to get a hold of you, what is your email address?
Alan, ALAN, at arctimes.com, not Arkansas Times, arctimes.com, ARKTIMES.com.
Julia, if someone wants to explore this incredible documentary, where is it? How do I find it? How do I view it?
Thank you. So they should go to justvision.org. That's JUSTVISION.org. Sign up to our mailing list so that they know when the film is coming to their city and their state, which will be very soon.
You're actually going to show it on a screen. I mean, where people have to attend, not the streaming world of today. Is that what I'm hearing?
So most events will probably be hybrid because we want to make sure that we account for accessibility for all communities to be able to see the film. But we also very much would like to bring people together to have conversations around these bills. Gretchen's
going to stay on top of that so we can make sure we help telling our audience where it is and how to be it. And Alan, again, Brian, I keep calling you Alan. I'm so sorry, but you are Brian, obviously. You both have facial hair, and those that are listening on Spotify have no idea why I said that.
This is a lot darker than mine.
The local ACLU is where you start your journey if you agree that your state is creating you to, Alan said it, you're signing a pledge to alter your editorial content in exchange for the state rewarding you. And that's not constitutional, correct? At least in my opinion.
Absolutely not constitutional.
There you go. Thank you all for your valuable time. This has been an amazing segment. We're going to stay on this story. And everyone stay well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.